Hello, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. In this video, which will be the second part or the companion video to the 300,000 records in a collection video, I'm going to show you the two alternatives to using a collection as the record source for a gallery and why one of them works really well, the other one does not work at all. Let's jump in. I previously created this little one-screen application to demonstrate what happens when we use collections, named formulas, and tables or direct links to tables as the items in our collection. The items come from the records in the employees table, which is in a database, a SQL Server database. There are 300,024 records in that table. Today, we're going to look at using the named formula, F employees, as the items list or record source for this gallery. In the previous companion video, we saw what happened when we loaded all 300,000 records into a collection and used that as the record source or the items list for this gallery. The named formula that we're using is called F employees. It's built from the employees table. We sort it by default, last name, first name, and then use show columns to ensure that all of the fields or columns in that table are available to us in this variable. Everything else is the same as it was in our previous video, including the use of the impossible name to ensure that when the application first starts, we have the smallest number of records possible in our gallery, in this case 0, because no names have that same pattern. Let's see what happens if we search, and I'm going to go ZYKH because that's the last name in our table. Nothing happens, no filtering happened. Why not? Are there any records with ZY? Z, but notice that Z appears in the first name of an employee name. The last name starts AA. These will be the first records. Somewhere in this section we find the letter Z in those names which appear at the beginning. Why are we not seeing the last name? When we had the 300,000 record collection, we were able to see that. Why not now? The answer is delegation. The formula, the named formula, retrieves only the number of records permitted by our delegation limit. No matter how many records are in that underlying table, with a named formula, we're only going to get the first 2,000. It loads those first 2,000 very quickly, so it's fast, but it only allows us to see the full record source if the total number of records in that underlying table is 2,000 or less, or depending on your delegation limit, 500 or less. Right off the bat, we can see speed is a factor here, but also usability. Even though we can get those first 2,000 records quickly, it's useless to us because we have a total of 300,000. Finally, let's look at how this works if we use the full table, the DBO employees table itself, as the item source or record source for this gallery. We'll change the record source or the items, uncomment that one, comment out this one, and launch the app. Now right away you'll notice a couple of things. It immediately populates the first 100 records. However, if I remove my filter it goes back to 0, which we would expect. Now, if I ask for that last name, it begins to load immediately the last set of records, those records where the last name is the last one in our list. Again, 100 at a time. If I scroll down past the end of that first 100 records, it brings in the remaining records for that match, which is a total of 148. If I remove my filter and go back to 0, put in A, it again loads the first 100 records. And as I scroll down through, once I get past that first 100, it loads the second 100. Scroll past that, we get to the third group of 100. If you recall, we have at least 2,000 records in this table where the letter A appears. It's going to take quite a while to find all of them. Fortunately, our searching is almost always going to be more than a single letter. For example, if I'm looking for, it again brings in the first 100, couple. Eventually we scroll far enough to reach the next 100, and it brings in actually 178 because that's the total number of records with that set of characters in either the first name or the last name. That kind of performance is not great, and it can be misleading because, as you saw, it brings in records, chunks of 100 at a time. Compared to the speed or the lack of speed in a large collection and the incomplete records of a named formula, I think this demonstration convinces me, at least, that my best bet is going to be to use the entire table, the direct table itself, all 300,000 records, as the items list or record source for my gallery, and ensure that I'm filtering effectively to prevent large numbers of records being brought in at once. The remaining negative is the fact that we don't necessarily see all of the records in that filtered set at once. I'm still looking for a reliable way to get around that particular problem. If you have any recommendations, I would love to hear them. A way to force the gallery to move to the end of the available records in a filtered record set so that I don't have to delay or scroll seeing the entire records. I'm going to sum up my observations and conclusions about the demonstration we just had regarding collections, named formulas, and direct links to the underlying data source as the items in a gallery. I deliberately chose a very large record source, the employees table with 300,000 records. This large record source, 300,000 records, dramatically illustrated the difference between the three approaches: collections, named formulas, and the direct table itself. On a smaller record source, we would have seen those differences, but they would not have been as apparent. For collections, then, what are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? First, collections are able to display all of the records in the record source in the app once that collection has been built or rebuilt. Subsequent searches do not require return trips to the server to bring back those records. Searches and filters therefore apply to the entire collection, and hence the entire record source is searched reliably. The drawbacks. First, as you saw, building a collection can be dramatically slower than a named formula. In a smaller record set, that may not be an apparent difference, but it is there, and it will be slower than an equivalent named formula. The second drawback to a collection is that it is static in memory. If the underlying record source changes, if there are any additions, deletions, or updates, modifications to any of the records in that data source, you must rebuild the collection to reflect those changes. Depending on how big that collection is, that may or may not be a noticeable delay in the performance. Again, with the enormous record set we're using for this demonstration, that would clearly be a problem. With a very small record source, it might not be even obvious to the user that it happened. The second choice, named formulas. The benefits of using named formulas are they have the fastest initial load time of the choices we looked at. They show all of the records retrieved from the record source into that named formula in the gallery without having to page. And they automatically refresh when they are used. Each time you invoke that named formula, it refreshes itself from the underlying data source automatically. The biggest drawback of using named formulas is that they are subject to the delegation limit of the application. In other words, 500 to 2,000 records. If your data source that you're working with has more than 2,000 records, named formulas are not a viable choice. Final option is the source table itself used directly as the item list for a gallery. The gallery can display all of the records from the record source subject to paging. In other words, the gallery will load records in some increment of, say, 100 at a time, requiring you to page and scroll to get to the end of the record source. The other advantage is that searches and filters apply to the entire underlying record source with server calls. As you request more records, that forces return calls to the server to get those records. The drawbacks are the flip side of the benefits. Because records are returned in increments, paging is required. Potentially, a user may be misled by the fact that some records are returned, but not necessarily all of the records are returned. And unless they're aware of that, they might be misled into thinking that they have retrieved all the records. The second drawback is, again, the flip side of searching for the entire record source, the ability to search the entire record source, which is that any display of records beyond the delegation limit requires repeat calls to the server to bring those back. Of the three sources we've considered, they all have benefits and drawbacks, but of the three, I think the one which has the most benefits and the least drawbacks would be the one we're looking at here, directly binding a gallery to a source table. I keep using the access terms. I don't know if you've noticed that throughout these videos. I just caught myself referring to binding, which is an access term. The item list is the source table. I'm going to sum up and issue a call to action. Reviewing the results of my 3 tests with collections, named formulas, and direct tables used as the items for a gallery, and thinking about some of the benefits and drawbacks to each approach, I've come to the following conclusions. These are my conclusions. You may differ, and if you do differ, I would love to hear your reactions. First, I decided that there are 3 broad categories in which we use records from an underlying data source. First, we have situations where we need a dynamic record source for a one-at-a-time transactional operation. When that's the case, we want to use the table itself or the SQL Server view itself or whatever our data source is itself directly as the items for a gallery. Of course, we're going to apply criteria which limit the number of items or records returned to that gallery to the least possible, one being optimal. For example, as we saw in this demo, selecting one record to update by searching on names. Potentially, the reason for bringing that one record in is that we're going to change something about it, dynamically changing the record source itself. When that's the scenario, a direct use of the data source itself seems to work best. Second broad category would be static record sources, i.e. lookup data in a list of 5 types of books or 7 company locations and so on. Those are not going to change. They're not likely to change during a given session. They're static. When we have that sort of static record source, primarily lookup data, we can use named formulas when the number of records in that data source is less than the delegation limit for that application. For example, a lookup list of options for a combo box of document types, manuscripts, published books, periodicals, or whatever that happens to be. And again, it's very unlikely to change during any given session. Named formulas work really well for that sort of static, small data source. The third broad category would be working sets or groups of records simultaneously involved in transactions. Compare this to our first one, which is a one-at-a-time transaction. Use collections in the gallery for the items where you need a temporary set of data for those processing tasks. For example, you would have a gallery in which you list all of the people available for work on a team. Your collection would be based on the people selected for that team. They would go into a collection, and then you would use that collection elsewhere for other process involving that team as a group. Now, for the call to action. I've given you my ideas, my conclusions, my recommendations for the most appropriate ways to use collections, named formulas, and direct data sources. Please respond. Let me know in the comments what you think. Am I right? Am I on the wrong track? What do you think is the best strategy? I appreciate your feedback.